Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Storytime. In today's Storytime, we go back to the subject of Sasquatch and Bigfoot, and we also go back to West Virginia. If you follow the Storytimes here at the Vault, you'll remember that we did a story time called Bigfoot Terrorizing West Virginia. Now, this story also comes from West Virginia, an area of the United States that is becoming more and more of a hotspot for Bigfoot and Sasquatch encounters and sightings. Today's story was submitted by George and Chasity Kennedy of West Virginia and was featured in the book Bigfoot-Frightening Encounters by Tom Lyons. This is the story Face to Face with Sasquatch. In the fall of 2008, my wife and I moved to the rural southern West Virginia and built a small log home in a sparsely populated area. We have approximately 20 people living within a 5-mile radius of us. Our property sits adjacent to a 13,000-acre wildlife management area. And in addition to the 20 acres of land that we own, I also lease another 800 plus acres for hunting. In the summer of 2009, my wife fell extremely ill from a failed kidney. She was in and out of hospital for several months during this time. After my wife had been released from the hospital to come back home, she was very weak and stayed in bed most of the time. During this time, our little girl was barely 2 years old and our son was 7 years old. My wife and little girl had laid down for a nap, and my son was in his bedroom, most likely playing a video game. I was sitting on our front porch, working on an electrical corn feeder that had recently been torn up, when I heard a rather loud shriek coming from across the mountain on top of the ridge adjacent to our home. Both of my basset hounds heard the shriek, and they began to growl deeply. Their fur bristled on end while they looked towards the mountainside. After a few moments of silence, I distinctly heard what sounded like a huge object crashing through the brush, coming off the hill from the ridge towards the house. The sound was loud, but it was also slow and methodical. It was almost as if something the size of an elephant was walking in the brush towards me. The dogs continued to growl and get more and more unsettled. I stopped what I was doing and started watching the woodline curiously. As the moments passed, the object responsible for the noise continued to get closer to our home as it walked in a straight line off the ridge. I realized that at any moment I would be able to see the culprit responsible for the racket, so long as it continued to walk in the direction it had been heading. I observed our dogs. They had retreated from our yard and had attempted to hide themselves in a large hole in the hillside that ran alongside our front yard. The hole was there due to me uprooting a tree earlier in the year. Finally, I could make out a large, hair-covered thing standing on its hind legs as it stepped out of the woodline and looked straight at me. The creature was approximately 60 yards away from my position and was standing in clear view of me without any obstructions. That past spring, the local power company had contracted a brush cutting company to clear out all the underbrush adjacent to the power lines. The creature was standing in this clear-cut area. When I first observed the creature, I immediately attempted to process what I was seeing. My first thought was that it was a bear standing on its hind legs. I further convinced myself that it made sense for me to be seeing a bear because I had 2 full trash cans sitting at the base of the hill near the road. This thought was further confirmed when the creature squatted down toward the ground, because I convinced myself that the bear had sat down on its rump. After the creature squatted down, it became completely motionless. It was so motionless that it literally melted into its surroundings. Had I not been looking straight at the creature as it squatted, I most likely would have never seen it in plain view. After the creature sat motionless and observed me for several moments, I became bored with looking at the bear, and I went back to tinkering with electronics I was working on. After a few minutes, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. I looked towards the movement and I witnessed the creature stand back up. At that moment, I knew that I wasn't looking at an odd-shaped, overgrown, dark brownish bear. I was looking at what I thought at the time was a monster. The monster turned side profile to me, while keeping its eyes locked on me the entire time. This is when I really got a good look at the creature, and then I knew without any doubt that I was looking at a monster and not a bear. The creature was between 7 and 8 feet tall, with a thick chest and large, long arms. The creature's waist was thick, and its legs and hips were extremely sturdy and powerful. I could not make out any facial features because of the distance, but I could see the brow ridge and eye sockets, as well as an oddly coloured skin that didn't have hair. The monster proceeded to walk from left to right while maintaining eye contact with me the entire time. It proceeded to walk a parallel line to my right for approximately 150 feet, and it entered a pine thicket across the road from my front yard. The creature stopped as it entered the thicket. It proceeded to make the loudest and most guttural roaring howl I had ever heard, which could never be replicated by a human being. The roar reverberated throughout my chest, and it literally felt as though it shook my porch. I began to panic, and I imagined that the creature was going to attack our home. Suddenly, the creature let out the most ghastly, ungodly, moaning howl that could only be dreamt up in someone's worst nightmares. As the creature's howl started to taper off, I could hear a low growl emanating from it. I could feel the reverberations from the growl, and I grew weak at the knees, and it sent a chill down my spine. I left the front porch area of our home and proceeded to arm myself. I thought of calling 911, but I realized that they might think I was either intoxicated or just a basket case. Needless to say, I could go on and on about events that happened after this initial incident, but let's just say that I became afraid of going outdoors for quite some time. I am an avid hunter, and I have been published in a popular hunting magazine for some of my trophy kills, but I became terrified of the woods after this. For the longest time following this incident, I had managed to block much of it out and forgot about it. Gradually, after talking to friends and doing a lot of research, I was able to start regaining some normalcy in my life again. Only after I re-entered the woods and I started hunting and fishing again did I fully remember the events that happened during this life-altering encounter. We hope you've enjoyed this story time from West Virginia and the case of the Kennedys and their face-to-face incident with Sasquatch? Let us know in the comments what you thought of the story. And please join us next time here on Storytime. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to stay safe and look after each other. We'll see you next time. Good night.